you have an older Honda and you have oil leaking in around your spark plugs, keep watching. I can show you how to fix that. I replace upper and lower spark plug tube seals in this video, and I also replace a leaking valve cover gasket. The repair in this video is done on a 95 Accord 4-cylinder non-VTEC engine. 95 makes this a 5th generation Accord, which ran from 94 to 97. So if you have an Accord from 94 to 97, a 4-cylinder non-VTEC, then engine-wise, this should be exactly what you have. Even if you don't have an older Accord, if you have an older Civic, Prelude, Odyssey, the repairs should be similar enough on my engine that you can learn enough to repair yours. Not all Hondas have 2 sets of spark plug tube seals. Some only have 1. Hope that yours only has 1. If that's the case, they're located right on the underside of the valve cover, easy to get to. If yours has 2 sets, the second set, the lower set, is located under the rocker arm assembly. So an easy way to find that out is calling your local Honda dealership, give them the VIN number for your car, and they can look it up and tell you whether you have 1 set of tube seals or 2. And if you do have 2 sets of seals, but you only replace the easy ones, the ones on top, the upper seals, then you run the risk of not solving your problem. Your lower seals could be the ones that were leaking, but if you don't take that rocker arm assembly out to replace the lower seals as well, you may not solve your problem. Here's how you can find your VIN number. If you don't know where your VIN number is, you can find it right there on the bottom right corner of your windshield. That little tag right there has got your number on it. If you do only have the upper set, they go right here, right on the underside of your valve cover. Easy to get to. If your car has lower seals as well, then you have to take out this entire assembly, the rocker arm assembly, which is located right underneath the valve cover. This is the underside of the rocker arm assembly, and you can see right there, that's where your lower seals go. Video is going to be long, about 30-35 minutes I would imagine when I put it all together. Just keep in mind, it was done by somebody doing this repair for the first time, so cut me some slack. I'm sure there's some things I should have done differently or could have done differently. So if you have comments or criticisms or corrections, just please make them constructive and put them down below so that they help somebody else out that's trying to make this repair. When it came to valve adjustment, I don't show you exactly how to do that because I didn't know how to do that. It was my first time adjusting valves. I'll refer you to a video by Eric the Car Guy, who is a mechanic. He has a video specifically for adjusting valves on Hondas. So within this video, there's a reference to his video so you can find that to learn how to adjust your valves. Alright, if you only have the upper seals, then the valve adjustment part does not apply to you unless you choose to adjust your valves at this time. So if you have lower seals, then you have to take out the rocker arm assembly and then reinstall it. Doing so disrupted your valve clearances. After putting it back in, you should adjust your valves. If you have upper seals only, you don't have to adjust your valves unless you choose to do so. Take this information for what it's worth, meaning don't make my video your only source of reference, especially if you have lower seals and you have to take out the rocker arm assembly, because if you don't do that correctly and reinstall it correctly, you could cause serious damage to your engine. So read repair forums, look at other people's videos, and make sure you understand what you're getting into before you take that on, if you have the lower seals. If you just have upper seals, it's an easy repair. All right, I am not a mechanic, so do your own research. First thing to do, disconnect your negative battery cable. All right, here we go. Let's take the plugs out. Taking the plugs out makes it easier to rotate your engine, which you have to do to get it in certain positions, top dead center for example, while you are adjusting your valve clearances. All right, you'll see that later. So take your plugs out, take your boots off, mark them if you have to, 1, 2, 3, 4, right to left on this car. Cylinder order is 1, 2, 3, 4. So put a piece of tape on the wire or right straight on the boot, 1, 2, 3, 4, right to left, throw them off to this side. Plugs out, lefty-loosey, 5/8 inch socket. Takes them out. Equivalent to 5/8 inch is 16 millimeter, if that's what you got. PCV valve has to come up. That just pulls straight up off the top. Now is a good time to replace that. It's only a couple of dollars. This vacuum line has to come off. This throttle cable, you have to take this bracket off, which you have to take this bolt off anyway, so that bracket comes with it. This bracket you don't have to take off because it'll just pop out from underneath. Then a 10 millimeter bolt right here holds this ground wire on, but that's all it does. So you take this off, take the ground wire off, put that bolt back in so you don't lose it. Then you have these 4, 1, 2, 3, 4 10 millimeter bolts. Those come up and then you can get the valve cover off. All right, got those 10 millimeter bolts taken off. Now, take a rubber mallet. Oh, there we go. Got the oil cap, filler cap taken off too, so I can
better grip on it, and that was easier than I thought. All right. Well, there we go. Valve cover off.
If you only have one set of seals, upper seals, there they are. All you have to do is take the valve cover off to get to them. There's 2 of them. There's 2 more off camera. They seat right against the top of the cylinders. And there's your valve cover gasket. So again, if you're lucky enough to only have upper seals, all you have to do is take off the valve cover to get to those seals. If you have lower seals, you got to take out the rocker arm assembly, but we'll get into all that.
And hard as a rock. They were leaking. You can see oil all around the spark plug wells. All right, well, I'll clean this up with some brake clean, get the old gasket off, all the old tube seals off as well, and then I'll start working on the rocker assembly, getting that out. Before you start taking bolts off the rocker arm assembly, you got to take 3 bolts off of the distributor housing, and you have to take the upper timing belt cover off. But here's how to do both of those. 2 10 millimeters, one right here and one in the back. These come straight up, and a 12 millimeter right here, because this aluminum right here is actually part of the rocker arm assembly. So before you take any bolts off of the assembly, take these 3 bolts out. To get your timing belt cover off so that you can see what position your engine's in, I'm going to need to know that when I go to adjust the valves. There are 2 bolts that hold the timing belt cover on. One's right here. This one's easy to get to, and one down here in the bottom left corner. That one is, it's not terribly difficult, but you have to take a 10 millimeter bolt off a bracket that holds your oil dipstick in place, and then move the dipstick to the side to reach this bolt.
In addition to taking the bracket off that held the oil dipstick tube in place, I also had to pull the tube up out of the oil pan just a little bit to get it to move to the side far enough. You might not have to do that, but I did. And for reinstallation, once I put the timing belt cover back on, I just slid it right back down into the oil pan. All it took was a little pressure pulling it up. But I did have to pull it up a little bit out of the oil pan to get it to move to the side far enough to get to that bottom left bolt. You might not have to, but I did.
Then you kind of pull the timing belt cover off at the bottom, you know, kind of out a little bit, and then it'll lift off. Now I can see what position on them. See right there in the middle, that says up. And when I reach the point of adjusting valves, that's going to need to be pointing straight up to do cylinder 1. It's going to need to be pointing straight ahead to do cylinder 3. The order is cylinder 1, 3, 4, and then 2 as far as adjusting the valves. So straight up for 1, straight ahead for 3, straight down for 4, straight towards the back for 2. And I'll be able to turn the engine and put it in the right position by turning this 19 millimeter bolt on this 19 millimeter bolt counterclockwise towards the front of the car on the power steering pump, and that will rotate the engine to the position that I need it to be in. But that's how you get to the timing belt cover. That's how you get it off, so you can see the position of your engine. So now let me get the rocker arm assembly off. There are these bolts down the middle. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. There are 12 bolts that are 12 millimeter, and there are 1, 2, 3, 4 across the back that are 10 millimeter.
When you're taking off the rocker arm assembly, don't just randomly take off bolts. Follow this sequence. These are the 12s. These are the 10s. Go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16. This is from Honda, not from me, because you don't want to just start on one side and go straight across, because the valve springs are pushing up as you're taking the bolts out, and you don't want the assembly to cock from one side to the other. So follow that sequence. That keeps the assembly tight in the middle until the very end. All right, follow that sequence for removal. Reinstallation sequence, exactly opposite. I'll show you at the appropriate time.
I have all the bolts loose, 10s and 12s, so everything should be loose. I should be able to lift it straight up. And oh, that one's hanging just a little bit. Make sure they're all loose. You know, they fall. It seems like they're falling back in, and the threads are grabbing just a teeny little bit. Hey, there we go. All right, so this side's up. And There we go. And there's one of the seals left behind. But take care. Don't flip it over. Don't flip this over. Just set it down straight for now. Set it down flat. Let's check out this one that got left behind. And be careful not to drop anything down in there. Oh yeah, it's hard as a rock. Look at that. Bam. That's why she's leaking. Hard as a rock.
Here's what I was talking about when I said don't flip the assembly over, keep the bolts in the same place. This is what you don't want to do.
Meanwhile, back at the bench.
And watch the little warning that pops up in the top left corner after he does it. After the fact, I'm sure he added this. Try not to let fasteners come out when you flip the assembly. It is spring loaded and will come apart.
Well, normally these get really
Don't flip it over. Don't flip it over. Just wanted to show you that. You want all the bolts to stay in the same holes. If you flip it over, they're going to fall out. It was recommended by a Honda tech in a repair form that I read to keep the bolts in the same holes, and it makes sense that you want them to go right back where they came out of, so you're assured that the rocker arm assembly will seat against the engine in the same way that it came off. Should you be able to swap the 12 millimeters around? Are they all threaded the same? Probably, but why take a chance? If you keep them in the same holes, you don't have to worry about that. So don't flip it over. I'll show you how you can lean it up. You can lean this up to get to those lower seals by rotating these 8 rocker arms on the exhaust side. Flip them up, and then you can lean the assembly up to get to those lower seals.
All right, here we go. Here's the bottom of the rocker arm assembly. Right here you can see where that's the lower tube seal that stuck to the engine, the one that was so brittle that I broke. But I've got an ice pick. I'm going to put it, there's a little slot right here. And I'm going to put it in and try to pry this, there we go, pry this old seal out. And these are probably the original seals. Let's see if this is as brittle. Yeah, I can tell it's hard as a rock. Look at that. As opposed to the new one. Let me clean this a little bit. And there are little pieces of metal, little wings kind of, that stick out. And as you press the new gasket in place, those little wings are going to hold them there. And there you go. Put a little bit of oil on them. So I'll do that for the other 3. And then I will reinstall the rocker assembly. Alright, it's as easy as that. I'm going to clean off the mating surface where those gaskets are going to be setting. I don't want any crud to possibly interfere with them sealing. Make sure the rocker arms are all in the right position.
I want to point out something that you need to guard against. This is during the rocker arm reinstallation, rocker arm assembly reinstallation. As I'm figuring out that I have those front rocker arms, the exhaust rocker arms, in the wrong position. They're still flipped up from when I had it on the workbench replacing the lower seals. But watch this right about now. Watch this arm right here, this rocker arm. As I'm messing with the front rocker arms, watch this. It flips down just a little bit. And now it's going to flip down even more as I continue to straighten the assembly out.
Screwing up.
Right here.
You're screwing up. You're screwing
Bam.
up. You're screwing
See it flip over? You have to make sure that the assembly is seated in the proper position before you start tightening the bolts. So just watch out for those rocker arms spinning like that. And again, flip the front rocker arms, the exhaust rocker arms, back down to this position before you try to reinstall it. Don't leave them flipped up in the position they were when it was on the workbench to reinstall the lower seals.
Feels like something's holding it up. That's not, that's not, that's not. These are. Aha, these need to be down. That's what's holding it up. That's what's holding it up. That should do it right there. Or not. What's holding me up back here? What is holding me up back here? Alright, bear with me. Oh, I see it right there, dumb butt. That's holding me up. Alright. That's what I'm talking about. I'm going to tap on it with a rubber mallet, get it beat down in there a little bit before I start tightening screws.
I made that look a lot harder than what it is. If you have the rocker arms in the right position to start with, the assembly just drops into place. I left all that in just so you could see what not to do.
And that did go down a little bit. There we go. Whoop, now that popped up. Alright, that's down. That's as far as it's going to go. So the springs, that must be the springs pushing up on it. Alright, I'm going to start tightening down bolts. Before you put a wrench on the bolts, just get them started by hand. That way you know they're not cross-threaded. Because the last thing you want is something cross-threaded. So get them started by hand, get them as far down as you can by hand, then put the torque wrench on them.
Here are two short clips from a video by Eric the Car Guy. He's at the same point in his repair as you should be right now. So he just warns about how careful you have to be at this point to make sure the rocker arm assembly is installed in exactly the right position.
I've actually seen engines get ruined because this procedure wasn't done with a whole lot of care, and accidentally one of these rocker arms was mispositioned on the valve, and as it tried to work the valve, it basically lost its keepers and broke the valve and broke a whole bunch of stuff. So if you're not careful here at this crucial step, you may pay for it dearly. I can't stress enough how important it is when you do this job to make sure that your rocker arms are making contact with the top of the valve, and that you can see these can move from side to side, and that also the back side of the rocker is making contact with the cam lobe. Probably the most important part of this entire thing.
Alright, you should have your rocker arm assembly in the right position now. Here is the bolt tightening sequence. Here's the sequence for reinstallation of rocker arm assembly bolts. Exactly the opposite of removal. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16 front bolts 12 millimeter, tighten to 15 foot-pounds. Rear bolts 10 millimeter, tighten to 9 foot-pounds. And remember, those specs are for a 95 Accord. Whatever make, model, and year of car you have, you need to research the torque specs for your car for rocker arm assembly bolts. But this sequence for reinstallation puts pressure on the assembly in the middle to start with, so it doesn't cock from one side to the other. Alright, so again, these are Honda. That information is from Honda, not me. Follow that for reinstallation. Alright, two examples of tightening down bolts on the rocker arm assembly. I'll show you one of the 12s in front to 15 foot-pounds, one of the 10s in back to 9 foot-pounds, but I'm actually tightening that 10 millimeter in the back to 10 foot-pounds because that's the lowest setting on my wrench, but it calls for 9. I'm tightening it to 10. That's close enough, no big deal. Here's the 12 millimeter. There you go, 15 foot-pounds. The 10 millimeter bolts across the back get tightened to 9 foot-pounds right there. All right, don't forget your two 10 millimeter here going down, and the 112 millimeter holding the rocker arm assembly to the distributor housing. Don't forget those. Now it's time to adjust the valves. So I have to get that up mark right here. Little white up mark. I've got to get it pointing straight up. So I'm going to put a 19 millimeter socket on the power steering pump, pull it towards me, towards the front of the car, counterclockwise. And you'll see this pulley move with a timing belt on it. And I just keep going until that white mark is top dead center. Straight up and down. I'm also watching to make sure all the rocker arms are moving, which they are. When I said I was watching the rocker arms to make sure they're moving, as I was turning that power steering pump counterclockwise to move the engine to different positions, 16 valves, 16 rocker arms that you need to make sure are moving freely. 8 in the front, the exhaust valves, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and 8 in the back, the intake valves. As you rotate that engine, the firing order in this car, it goes from cylinder 1 to 3 to 4 to 2. So these rocker arms, these 4, should move. Cylinder 1 at some point, then cylinder 3, then cylinder 4, then cylinder 2. You should see them rise and move a little bit as the cam lobes push the rocker arms up from underneath. It's imperative that you watch for that, because you have to make sure that they're in the right position. If they're pinched or impinged or locked down for some reason and you don't catch that fact and you put it all back together and try to start your car, you're going to cause some serious damage. All right, so make sure those rocker arms are moving as you're turning that pulley.
That right there is straight up and down. These valves are loose, so I'll adjust the valves on cylinder number 1, and then I'll crank it so that that white mark is pointing straight at the front of the car. I'll do cylinder 3 straight down, cylinder 4 straight towards the back, cylinder 2. Got all the valves adjusted. The intake side on the back, the exhaust side on the front. I have the engine at top dead center, so cylinder number 1 is set to be adjusted. And I wanted to show you one thing that I did. It was someone's suggestion that I read online. And for the front, 0.012 is what you want. But someone suggested, so there it is, just drags a little bit. But somebody suggested getting one size above, one size below. So this is 0.011, which feels loose. 0.013 won't even go in. 0.012, a little bit of resistance. So I used one below, one above, and the one I wanted, to make sure I got it as close as I possibly could.
How did I find the valve clearance specs for my vehicle? This sticker is on the underside of my hood, and it gives the valve lash, which is the same as valve clearance specs for my car. The intake side, or the 8 valves on the back side of the engine, the back side of the rocker arm assembly, exhaust valves, which are the 8 valves on the front side of the assembly. The intake, and these measurements are metric in millimeters. The intake side, the backside valves, 0.26 millimeters. For the exhaust in the front, 0.30 millimeters. But there's an allowance of 0.02 millimeters for each one. This set that I already had, this set of feeler gauges, and angled feeler gauges is what you want. They're easier to use than flat if you have to buy a set. This set did not have 0.26 or 0.30. It did have 0.31 and 0.25. So with the allowance given by the manufacturer of this vehicle, these were both fine. The 0.31 millimeters, the numbers I've been calling out to you, 0.012 and 0.010 are in inches. But their metric equivalencies are 0.012 is equivalent to 0.31 millimeters, which is within the range of 0.30 plus or minus 2 millimeters of 0.02 millimeters for the exhaust. So I use these for the front valves, and that's perfectly fine, acceptable. The 0.010 that I use for the back, that's in inches, equivalent to 0.25 millimeters, which calls for 0.26 with a variance of 0.02 millimeters. So both of these on the set that I already had without buying another set were perfectly fine. And the difference between 0.25 millimeters and 0.26 millimeters is 1/100th of a millimeter. Very little. And again, allowed by the manufacturer of the vehicle. But make sure, look right here, cold. That means that the valve adjustment needs to be made on my vehicle when it is stone cold, like first thing in the morning, hasn't been run since the prior day, needs to be absolutely stone cold to get an accurate valve clearance measurement. Okay, but look at the sticker on the underside of your car. If you have to buy a set, try to get the exact, the specific clearances that you need. But if you have an existing set like I did, you may be able to use the variance and use the set that you have. Okay, that's it.
Adjusting the valves involves loosening this 10 millimeter lock nut, turning the screw to adjust the clearance, and then once you find that correct clearance, you hold the screw in the same spot and then you tighten down on the nut. Lots of good videos out there showing you how to adjust valves, much better direction than I could give you. All right, so valves are adjusted. I went back and double checked them all to make sure they're tight.
All right, here's the video that I watched, Honda Accord valve adjustment, Eric the car guy, and I recommend you watch it as well.
Got a couple requests for a video on valve adjustments. This is a valve adjustment on a Honda.
Valve adjustment on a Honda. It's exactly what you're going to face if you're adjusting valves on a Honda. And again, clear and concise. I recommend you watch this. Now that the valves are adjusted, it's time to start putting things back together. Here we go.
Put your timing belt cover back on with the two 10mm bolts, and then once you get the lower bolt down on the bottom left, don't forget to put the 10mm bolt back in the bracket that holds the oil dipstick in place, and then snap your little electrical cable back on top. Just don't forget that. Now I'll put the upper tube seals and the valve cover gasket on the valve cover. Here are the upper tube seals, the new ones, and you can see that there's kind of there's a recessed side, deeper side, and that's the side that goes down. Alright, so you got to bend it a little bit to conform, because this is kind of oval, but pushes in there pretty easy. You can take a little hammer and tap on it, make sure it's in there good. So I'll do that for 2 more, and then put the valve cover on. Alright, when I took the old gasket off, it had little flaps just like this, and I made a mental note as to what side the little flaps were on, and they were on the side with the oil, the filler cap. So this is the side it goes on, and when you install it, again, this is my first time ever doing a valve cover gasket job, but I have read that you should just push straight down and try not to get it in the groove and then push, because you might drag it with your finger, with your thumb, and stretch the gasket. So get it right in the groove, press straight down. And this is an aftermarket gasket. This is a Fel-Pro, so I hope it stays in the groove when I flip it over. I may have to put some, what is this, Permatex RTV silicone in the little groove to hold it, but I'll try it without it first. Let me get it pushed down all the way around, and then I'll head to the engine to install it. I've cleaned off the surface, where the old RTV was, right on the corners, right where these flat spots on the gasket are.
When I said I cleaned it off, I mean that I degreased it. I used mineral spirits. You want to make sure you get all the old Permatex or silicone off and degrease the metal. You don't want any film or oil to interfere with the Permatex sealing against the metal. And the reason for the Permatex on these corners is because of the possibility of irregularities in the metal at those corners. I guess the way they assemble, that this part of the metal is machined perfectly smooth, and right here maybe they had to do some welding, but there's a chance of irregularities in those 4 corners. So make sure you degrease the spots directly underneath where that Permatex is going to be, because you want clean metal. Mineral spirits like I did, brake clean, sprayed on a rag. Just make sure there's no grease and the metal's nice and clean.
I'm going to add some right now, right on those flat spots. Just to get a good seal. Alright, now, moment of truth. I'll flip this sucker over. Hopefully, the gasket's going to stay in place. It looks like it went in pretty tight. I believe it did stay in place. Yes, it did. Alright, I'm going to take a mirror and use it across the back, a little mirror down there, and so I can look for the blue of the gasket all the way down to make sure it didn't fall out before I tighten everything down. So let me do that.
I wish I could film this segment over right here, because I didn't realize I was blocking the camera like I was. I didn't think about it like I should have. But I want to talk about one thing right here that you need to do.
Flip this sucker over.
When you flip it over, do it as carefully as you possibly can. Don't spin it around. Do it nice and slow, because as soon as you flip it over, gravity is working on that gasket. You know, it's just pushed down into that groove, as you know. And the more gently and carefully you can flip it over and move it into position over those 4 bolts that you have to line it up with, the more slowly and carefully you can do that, the better chance you have that that valve cover gasket will not come out. So do it slowly.
All right, here's what I was talking about when I said using a mirror along the back side of the valve cover. I'm checking the gasket. See that blue gasket? That's the new gasket I just installed. And I went all the way along the back side to make sure it was in the right position. And you can't do that unless you use a mirror. So before I tightened down, I wanted to make sure that it was in the right position. And it is all the way around. It did not fall out. So now I'm good to tighten everything down. Fortunately, I read the directions on the Permatex RTV sealant that I used on the corners of the valve cover, because it calls for only tightening the bolts. When you're reassembling the valve cover, only tighten the bolts initially, hand tight, until you see some of the sealant squirting out on the side. Then you wait an hour for it to solidify a little bit, so that, I guess, if you crank down on it right away, then you're going to squeeze a lot of that sealant out. So you let it set up for an hour and then come back and tighten the bolts. So I'm going to wait an hour and I'll be back. All right, I let it set up for an hour. Then I came back and tightened down to 4 10mm bolts on top of the valve cover. I went back left, front right, back right, front left. Torque specs are 7.4 pounds for these bolts. As I told you earlier, my wrench only goes down to 10. So I used a regular ratchet, just got them nice and snug, and then just a little bit more, because 7.4 pounds is not very much. And I didn't want to snap one of these 22-year-old bolts off. I didn't want that aggravation. So I got a nice even compression, I think, following that pattern of bolt tightening. Got a good even compression on the valve cover gasket. So I'm comfortable with that. I put the ground wire back on. Don't forget about that. Snap the throttle cable back into this little clamp. Plugs back in. Torque specs for the plugs are 13 foot-pounds. I'll show you one of those in a second. Put my plug wires back in. My PCV valve back in. Put this hose back in with a little clamp down at the bottom. And now, following directions again, that Permatex calls for 24 hours for a full cure before putting the vehicle back into operation. So this is a spare car for us. I can afford to wait a day. That's what I'm going to do. I'll see you in 24 hours. Here's a plug going back in at 13 foot-pounds. Right there. But remember, research your make, model, and year of car. Don't just go by the 13 pounds that I'm giving you for a 95 Accord. All right, wait for it. There we go. Time to crank it up. If I did something wrong, we'll hear it right away. We'll hear metal breaking, or we'll hear valves, you know, tapping like crazy. But I'm confident I did everything right. All the bolts are torqued down right on the rocker arm assembly. Valves are adjusted and everything was tight. First time getting that deep in an engine, but I'm confident it's going to be okay. We'll know right away if I did something wrong. So here we go. Cross your fingers. A little bit of valve tapping, but way better than what it was before. And I'll take that for a 22-year-old engine. So, all right, let me shut it off. Woohoo! Oh, baby. I was a little bit nervous, I'm not going to lie. I've never been that deep into the engine, but glad it turned out well. I hope the video helped you out. Just be careful when you get into that rocker arm. Make sure you get everything put back together the right way. If I can do it, you can do it. All right? So if you try it, good luck, and peace out from Georgia.